Hello everyone, welcome to another LifeCast. You're changing your beer this week, aren't you?
Changing what?
You going for a cider?
I am.
A beer and a cider, please, Adam.
Mix it up.
It's worth noting, we've just had a conversation then about haircuts. Paul, who I respect, good friend of mine, has just told us that he doesn't go to the same barber every time he gets his haircut, which I just think is serial killer behaviour, but that's another podcast. We'll leave that there.
We've got a snippet of it, haven't we?
Well, we put the snippets out at a later date. But the real serious kind of point of the podcast this week is actually a bit of a, it's quite, it might be quite thought-provoking, I think, for people. Quite sad because it's loneliness. I've definitely suffered from loneliness in certain parts of my life. I'm not sure whether you have, in what degrees and in what sense, but I think, you know, a podcast can help, you know, take away a degree of loneliness, you know, long car journeys, or just if you are genuinely on your own and you can listen to a podcast, be part of the conversation. And I just thought it'd be beneficial for this week to just touch upon that, on kind of your experience of it, what it means to you, what you think you can do to help it, and also the varying degrees of loneliness, because the more I thought about it, I've been lonely in different parts of my life at different times, and we live in a world now where, if you look at my social media, I don't know, 20,000 followers, whatever I've got, and you think, wow, he's got loads of mates, he's got, you know, and there's been times when I've, you know, posted a picture up of like 10 mates, and I'm feeling so lonely. Do you know what I mean? And probably loads of people have done that.
I'll tell you what's mad about what you just said there about the actual podcast itself, your podcast. You know, I go out with you in Liverpool and people come up to you. They talk to you like they know you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because they do.
Yeah.
You might not have never physically met them, but they talk to you. They're able to have conversations with you about things you've said. So I think, you know, as you say, podcasts solve one part of loneliness. So
100%.
if we look at, we'll talk a bit about mine in a bit. I think mine is far less than yours, but one of the reasons we are talking about it on this pod is quite a few people, when we've gone out and said, what do you want us to talk about? It's actually been quite a recurring thing, hasn't it?
Yeah, loads of people have asked us to speak about this.
Yeah. So let's talk about your first point of being lonely.
First bout of loneliness, if you like.
First of all, you've got a sister.
Two sisters.
Two sisters.
Two sisters, yeah.
So how old was you when they were?
So I was 8 when the first one was born, and then 10 when the second one was born. So I had a only child kind of upbringing, if you like. But I think my first bout of loneliness came when I was 12, when my mum passed away. Now, I was a real mummy's boy. I said to you off camera then, I was kind of, you know, I'd get told to run the shop for the paper or for milk, and I'd be like, I love you, mum. My dad would be like, fuck off, you only go in the shop, you'll be back in 2 minutes. But I was so much kind of, and then when I kind of lost that, you know, that person in my life, I couldn't really say to my dad, I love him every 2 minutes, because he just wasn't that type of person. So I kind of felt there was a bit of me that I couldn't speak to anyone about. You know, I had this love to kind of give to my mum who wasn't there. And I felt, you know, really lonely, couldn't speak to anyone. Then when you bring it into your upbringing in school, I was different then. Do you know what I mean? I was like, no one could really relate. No one, I think I was the only kid in the school, or there might have been one other whose mum had died. So I felt a bit different, a bit like people are talking conversations, oh, my mum might do this, or my mum. I couldn't say that anymore.
How did you deal with that? There might be people, and there probably is people that are going to watch or listen to this podcast, where there's been like a death of a parent in the family. How did you deal with it? What did it feel like?
I probably haven't dealt with it, probably why
this
podcast is a good idea to talk about stuff. But mate, I always say in the motivational talks that I do, losing my mum was the hardest thing I've ever been through in my life, and it's affected so much of my life, and to this day, and loneliness being one of them. You know, to this day, how I dealt with it at the time, I couldn't kind of give you one answer. You just a little bit of just cracking on. Do you know what I mean? Talking to people where you can, when you can. But I don't think there is a way to deal with it. You know what I mean? It was incredibly tough. I really, really.
Was there anything you needed? So if there was, you know, as I say, there's somebody listening out there where they've been in that unfortunate circumstance you found yourself in, that tragic circumstance. Is there anything that could have alleviated the pain? Or
I think looking back now, it would have been probably beneficial for me to go to like a group, you know, like a bereavement group of like other kids who have lost parents, because I didn't really speak to anyone. about it as a kid, you know what I mean? Didn't really, well, I obviously grieved, I was crying all the time, but I mean, to speak to other kids who had lost parents, I think that might have maybe helped. Who knows, but comes back to that being around people and not feeling that loneliness. I think that probably would have helped. That was probably the first bout of loneliness.
Just thought, I didn't segue into this at all, but I think, you know, I'm chair of a kids' bereavement charity. No, do you know? It was only as you were saying it then, as you was answering it and saying, but I've been chair of Once Upon a Smile for about 10 years.
Oh, well, I've heard of them, yeah.
And Once Upon a Smile was set up. It was originally set up to deal with the children left behind when there was another sibling that had passed, which really, obviously, when there's a sibling that's got a long-term illness, that there were lots of charities for that, Make-A-Wish and all these great charities that take you to Paris as your last wish or whatever. So it was originally set up to go, hold on a minute, there's a family unit that's been broken. How do we reintegrate? But as there was, as it kind of evolved, it became a charity where it just looked after all bereavement, of any bereavement where there's a child involved under the age of 16. And we've built a bereavement centre in Trafford Park. And in it, I think there's about, I don't know, it might be 400 or 500 kids now that pass through that who've lost someone. And they have memory days. And so if there are people out there and you need someone to talk to, you know, Once Upon a Smile is a Manchester-based charity. I'm sure there's others around there, but...
Yeah. Oh, I think that's great to hear that you're involved in that and stuff, because it will no doubt help people. And I think that's what probably could have helped me. And that's what I think probably the first kind of loneliness I felt. Second...
Did you notice your dad being lonely?
Well, that was another thing I was going to say. The loneliness my dad probably still feels to this day. You know, he lost his wife when he was 36. You know, the last episode we done was all about parent guilt. I know that he feels a parent guilt. He feels that loneliness, that he was kind of suffering himself, but he wasn't being a good dad, which he was. He was being a great dad, but he feels the guilt, but loneliness for him as well. And to this day, do you know what I mean? He's a young man. He's only 50 odd. The loneliness of not having a wife, of bringing up 3 kids on his own. You know, it's huge, and loneliness for me is one of the saddest things about life. It really does get me down when I think about older people, you know, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, who have lost people, you know, the widowed, the kids have gone, the grandkids have gone, and they're on their own. It absolutely kills me. And I think, which we'll come on to in a bit, but like, I think COVID caused a lot of this, and we're reaping the kind of the effects of that. But for me personally, another big time I felt lonely was after I got blown up in Afghanistan. Just because, again, I felt on my own in the sense of I had people around me, but no one kind of knew what I was going through. You know, 20 years of age, I'd lost my leg and being told that I couldn't have children. I didn't know any other 20-year-olds who had went through that. It was very hard to kind of, you know, to deal with. But I've also felt loneliness more recently in a sense of in social situations where I think this might be a bit more prevalent to people, in the sense of, you know, if you're in a kind of a group of friends or something, it could be like, well, I'll just give you my example. I felt like if I've had opportunities and stuff with certain people, I felt like I've not been able to share them properly, because people might go, who the fuck's he think he is? He's getting too big for his boots or something. And you know, in social situations, so I've ends up kind of not saying certain things and not sharing certain news, because you don't really want to put anyone else out or make anyone feel uncomfortable. So you end up kind of not sharing certain things. So then you end up being a bit insular and thinking, I've got no one to really talk to about this. I've got no one to share this good news with. Which I think is quite a lonely feeling I've had over the years as well.
We'll come on to that in a second. When you obviously when you went through what you did coming out of Afghanistan, how did you cope with that?
Luckily for me, the good thing was I had this kind of, I'd say, probably 6 months of loneliness, if you like. And then when I went from hospital to the rehabilitation centre, I was then surrounded by a lot of injured soldiers. So then that straight away kind of alleviated a bit of loneliness, because there was other people in similar situations.
It's quite a key point, that, isn't it?
Massive.
For other people out there who are lonely.
Yeah, massive. And you know, the one thing I think I was so lucky with, you know, if I'd suffered all of my injuries from a car crash, I walk outside here tonight and I get knocked over by a car and I had the exact same injuries as I had from being blown up in Afghanistan, I would be placed on a ward in Manchester after I've recovered, if you like, and it could be an award with someone with, I don't know, a heart problem, someone who needs the kidney out, someone who needs a liver transplant, and I'd be on a ward with varying ages, different people, and it'd be very hard to kind of relate to people. For me, why I was so lucky was I was surrounded by everyone who's in a very similar situation to me, and that massively helped with my loneliness.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I just couldn't relate to anyone. Do you know what I mean? And my dad was there, and my sisters were there. I had friends coming to visit me, but how can you relate to a 20-year-old who's just been told 1 minute he's this big, rough, tough Royal Marine Commando, the next minute I was getting spoon-fed, being told I've lost my career, I've lost my leg, and you can't be a dad. Who do you speak to apart from other people who are getting told the same thing?
Yeah.
So the big thing on that is I'd try and surround myself by people who maybe are going through something similar, and maybe like join groups and stuff like that, and push yourself to get out there. But again, that's easier said than done, because when you are feeling lonely, the last thing you want to do is get out there and meet new people. So that's why I feel I was very lucky that the loneliness I felt after being injured.
Did you have a lack of confidence at the same point, or not? Was there a lack of confidence to go into those groups? I mean, yours was the most extreme.
That's what I mean.
Scenario,
I don't want people to think, God, it's totally unrelatable.
But I could imagine that you're in a position of loneliness, and I would have thought your self-confidence is also pretty diminished, which stops you getting into the places you need to be, which is with like-minded people.
So initially when I got injured, I had this huge cage on my leg, and it was so glaringly obvious I couldn't wear jeans, or I had to wear shorts or baggy tracksuit bottoms for such a long time, which made me stand out. And you know, I didn't like that, and it made me feel lonely, because again, I couldn't speak to anyone who was going through something like that. I was only a young lad trying to speak to girls and stuff. Again, it was really strange. So yeah, it was a very lonely period, more so when I came back to my civilian friends. When I was around the military guys who had been through something similar, I felt a bit more at ease, a bit more comfortable. But again, when I was back in Liverpool dealing with normal life, I was really, really lonely, because when I actually came out the Marines and transitioned into being a civilian again, I realised I was so different to everyone else, which was a benefit in some ways, but I had nothing in common with anyone. And my highs were so high, because I was getting to do all these amazing things, but my lows were really low. And I found it hard to kind of then find a level with people. And because I kind of wasn't on the same kind of 9 till 5, go home, your mum and dad are there, your missus, whatever, I was this one-legged lad who'd just been blown up, got no career, doing his own thing, which some amazing highs again, some amazing lows. It put me in this kind of loneliness where no one could kind of relate to me, and it was really tough because I couldn't really speak to anyone. And that's what I'm saying. Sometimes I'll be in friendship groups, and you know, you look on social media and there's big photos of everyone in a group photo, but actually I'm probably at that time when there's a photo being taken and you've got loads of friends around, you're smiling. Inside, I'm like, I feel fucking really lonely. I can't speak to anyone. No one understands what I'm going through, which is a really sad thought, really, when you think about it, when there's loads of people around you, but you don't feel comfortable enough in speaking. So the point I'm getting at is loneliness has affected me in different ways through, whether it's my mum passed away through being injured in Afghanistan, or social situations where, for one reason or another, I haven't felt comfortable in the past, and despite it looking like I'm surrounded by people, I've actually felt lonely. And from people asking us to speak about this, you can guarantee other people feel loneliness for similar things. And I think for you as well, you know, you run a business. I don't feel like I've ever had a job. I loved being in the Marines and I love doing the speaking. I've never worked in a big environment. Even starting from the bottom, and you're working up and maybe you get promoted and stuff like that. I don't know how it works, but I can imagine that can be quite lonely as you rise through the ranks, and suddenly, you know, you're all working together, then you get promoted, then you're now the boss, and I can imagine there to be loneliness in the workplace as well.
I think we've spoke about this quite a bit. You know, we talked about if you're in the McVitie's, if you're making Jaffa cakes in the factory at McVitie's, right, and there's 8 of us and we go for a beer every Friday afternoon, right, and then the next week I get promoted to supervisor of the line, right, and the next week you turn up late, and you're messing up what we need to do. I'm going to say, Andy, and the first thing you're going to do to me is go, oh, it's like that now, is it? First thing that's going to happen. It's like that now, is it? And then we're going to go out on Friday and you're going to be annoyed with me because I've told you that you need to be in at 9 o'clock or 10 to 9 because we've got a Jaffa cake. Like, you know, I'm talking at like, at that kind of factory level even, right? At any level of an organisation where you've got tiers. And I can guarantee you by about week 4, I'm not getting, there'll be 7 people going for beers on a Friday afternoon. It's just the way it is. And I think, listen, I asked you before, was you an only child? I've got a sister who's 6 years older than me. And that there's a difference between a 12-year-old girl and a 6-year-old boy, do you know what I mean? And by the time I was useful to do anything, she was
Gone.
dating lads or whatever, you know, whatever 13-year-olds do. But so I felt like I was an only child. And so I've been quite, I'm quite content on my own. I'll go out for a pint every week on my own. And some people go, you sit in a pub on your own. I'm like, and some people go, I'll join you. And I'm thinking, no, I didn't tell you I'm going for a pint on my own on Saturday because I want you to join me. I'm absolutely, that's like 2 hours really of me just in my own mind with my own thoughts, doing what I want. And I love it. Not this Christmas, the Christmas before. I'd wrapped all the presents, Christmas Eve. I'd wrapped all the presents by 9:30 or whatever. And my missus was watching some Housewives of Summer. And I looked at it and I thought, I've got a chance here. So I said, I'm just going to go to the top of the road, get something from the shop. I'm going to have a couple of pints in the pub. I get to the top of the road. She says, fine, it's like 9:30 at night. Get to the top of the road, get in the pub. It's everybody's roaring, the fire's roaring, it's Christmas Eve, all this Christmas cheer. And there's a little 2-seater thing, my name written on it. I goes to the bar, get my pint, sit there, and I thought, wow, I'm buzzing. I was buzzing. And I could see these 2 women looking at me as if to think, it's Christmas Eve.
I felt sorry for you.
They did. They were looking at me. And the more they were looking at me, I had to go, I'm all right. Yeah. They started to inch further, so I goes, no, I'm happy here, I'm happy. And they went, you're happy on your own? I said, I'm happy as a pig in shit right now. I'm getting an hour to myself on Christmas Eve. So I've, when it comes to general loneliness, I would say, I don't really suffer from it because I feel like I like my own space as being a kid. I was very much in the house on my own, doing my own thing, and I quite like that. I've got a very busy life in business where there's, you know, people everywhere, teams that we're working with all over the place. But there will be points where the 2% of loneliness I have is impactful.
I was going to say, it must be massive.
Because if something's going on in the organisation today, who am I going to tell?
Well, that's what I think. When I think about loneliness and I think about your situation, it's for me, when I think about loneliness, it's having someone to turn to. And I just think I'd assume, that you would be lonely, maybe not as lonely as I thought in that sense, but I just think that when the shit must have hit the fan for you as a business leader, I just think, who do you speak to?
So I'd say the quantity of loneliness is not that much. The kind of depth, quality is definitely not the right word for it. The depth of loneliness at the point is a 10 out of 10. Because who are you going to turn to? What are you going to do? In reality, because of what we do, there isn't a client to turn to. Actually, we are that. In some cases, I am that person where another business leader would come to me and say, I've got no one to turn to, but I've got you. And I look around and think sometimes, I need that, but who am I going to speak to? Yeah. And there's also an element of, whenever I'm in that situation, there's a rawness of a situation. Something's gone seriously wrong is a reality. Something's gone or is going seriously wrong. And what am I going to do? Somebody who sells services to help people. You go out and tell them actually.
But you're not a robot though.
No. Who do you go to?
That's what I mean. It's nowhere near on the level you're on, but a time when I felt loneliness, and the only time I opened up about it was when I wrote my book. And I remember doing a motivational talk on stage, and I was just splitting up with my little girl's mum. I was just I think I was sleeping on the couch or something. Life was pretty, not great. I remember standing on stage doing this motivational talk, and then I remember getting in a taxi on the way home and just like crying my eyes out on the way home. And I think who could I speak to? I'm a motivational speaker. No one wants to know about a motivational speaker who's feeling really shit and lonely. Yeah. So you just don't speak to anyone.
No.
Do you know what I mean? It's a little bit like in your role.
But I think we all make that up in our own heads, right? Because I will make up who wants to know about my issue. You will say, I'm a motivational speaker. There'll be the supervisor on the factory of those 8 guys we just discussed who goes, I can't tell this 7. They were my mates like 4 weeks ago. They don't want to know. And in reality, I think that's probably wrong. I think there's probably more people you can go to than what you think. Truthfully, I think you're probably held back by your ego.
Yeah,
right?
oh, massively on that, yeah.
I won't talk about you, I'll just talk about me. I think truthfully, will it be detrimental to my business? Will it be detrimental to my reputation? Will it be detrimental to da-da-da? You know what, I'm just going to store it up and deal with this. And I think for me, it happens a lot. If something's going really well, who do I got to go home, right? We've got 4 kids. There's enough on Zoe's plate. She doesn't need me to be coming home telling her all the things that's not going quite right now, which tends to lend itself to the loneliness with me, because I think who can I bounce off, who can I share with at this level? So it must be going pretty wrong. And the last thing my missus needs is me coming home at night at 8 o'clock, giving her a whole load of problems that she can't deal with.
And the last episode, was about parent guilt as well. So you want to be home and you want to be a good dad as well.
There you go. So there you go. So I think so that's on that part. What I would say is this, it comes back again, is that's probably the most kind of serious loneliness. And as I say, they're more fleeting. What I would say is this, which I do find, I don't know the right word here, I could get myself in trouble, but I've grown up and I try to stay close to my roots. I think as you get successful, and there'll be people on this podcast, because there's all varying degrees of loneliness and different contexts to it, there'll be people who have become successful who listen to this podcast. And they might be just as lonely, if not more lonely, than the people who aren't. Because what you kind of find is people drift away. I find that I try and keep them together. But in my group of friends, I'm the person that has to make the call. I'm the person that has to arrange, you know. If it's a holiday, not to everybody, but to some, I might even have to pay for it, right? And they can find money to do other things. I don't know why that is. I don't know what that is. There's no fallout, but I feel like
the dynamics.
There's a change in I think sometimes they just think, I don't want you to buy me a beer. I don't want you to take me on holiday. So rather than do that, I'll just distance myself away. So that is a real, we find ourselves, me and Zoe, where, and this would probably come back to everybody in a little bit. You think when you're at school, you've got 10 friends or 20 friends or whatever. And then you get to a workplace and you might have, 10 friends. And as you get older, you start looking around and you think, where are the friends? And I think everybody has that epiphany one day where you think, and they always say, if you've got 5 mates on your hand you can count on, you're a lucky individual. Yeah. Sometimes you have to, it tests you that, doesn't it?
100%. And the whole thing you say with kind of lads you grew up with and stuff, I've had similar situations where I don't know, where you think, I don't know, people would maybe be happy for you and stuff, and maybe they're not as happy as you think, and then you start being a bit, and then you just do end up just pulling back a little bit, and you think...
You can't be yourself sometimes, because you might want to say, how's it gone this week, lads? You might be with 4 of them, and they might have had a shit week. We're in tough times. And they say, how is it with you? They stop asking you, by the way, in the end. They stop even asking. Because if you're about to turn around and say, I've just been flown to Shanghai to do a talk for Nike, in reality, you might be with a couple of friends who can't actually comprehend what that is like. And if they can't comprehend it, they don't mean anything bad by it, but they show a lack of interest. I don't know if you've found that. There's a real lack of interest. I can walk into a room, and I swear this is the truth. If I go to a family do, I'll say, Andy, how's it going? How's it going with this? How's work? How's your kid?
You.
Hey?
No one asks you.
Do you have the same thing?
Yeah, in the sense that I always think that, what I've just stopped doing type thing is, I've kind of just done myself down a bit in a sense, because you don't really want to. And
look like a show off, by the way.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing.
Dickhead.
I never ever spoke about things to show off. I just very naively thought, these are friends, these would be dead happy for me. Some of them were, don't get me wrong, but then obviously some people aren't happy for you, who you think are your friends, who probably aren't. So then you start going, well, I don't want to make people feel shit, so I just won't really say what I'm up to. So then because you don't say nothing, you get them. That's where I think the loneliness then comes in. So that's just the loneliness I've experienced, and I guarantee there'll be people who've got groups of friends that feel like I can't say that because they won't be happy for me, so I'll just keep it to myself.
It's a fact. I've got family members, and the closest family members, and I will do a project in Spain.
You won't be allowed to go to Christmas dinner.
I'll do a project in Spain, and I'll go around to my family. I'm not going to say who they are. I'll go around to my family member's house, and they will talk about something that's at the periphery, another property project that's going on. And we'll spend half an hour on that, and I think, I just built a fucking place in Marbella in Spain. Yeah. And I don't think that, I just think it's human nature sometimes that you don't want to hear the stories. And I think...
But these things though can add to, maybe I'm more sensitive than most, I don't know. I do think I am quite a needy person, I do need that, which was really interesting hearing you saying you like being on your own. I am a needy person, I do love, human interaction, I do love being around people. But it is interesting because they're the ones I've had. What I do fear with people at home who are listening, who have maybe wanted to throw in with the word loneliness, is I think there are people in situations that probably never thought they'd be in, single parents, who maybe just haven't got anyone to give the kids away to and just don't have that adult time. I think, COVID, people probably learned a lot about probably friendship groups. They probably learned a lot about who they can rely on.
I think you struggled in COVID.
I hated it.
I can imagine that.
I absolutely despised COVID, and I wasn't one of these kind of conspiracy theorists who I just mean, Paul, I love my life. I love doing the speaking. I love doing the podcast, speaking to interesting people. I love going to the match with my mates. I love seeing my daughter every day. I love my life, and I just feel like the world stopped, and all the things I love doing stopped with it. And there was a lot of people in the world who hated the job, hated having to see certain people, hated to do this. Yeah. So they then revelled in not having to go to work, being paid to sit at home. They don't have to go and see anyone because they don't like the people. I was the opposite. So I became really bitter and resentful about it and really fucking lonely. And I think that's when as well, and in social circles and stuff, and it's like, we live in a world now with social media and WhatsApp groups and stuff, and it's like, I would have went on that walk, or I want to go here, and I want to do that, whereas it was never ever a thing before COVID. It was just like...
Did you do anything during COVID, or did you just wait for it to pass?
No, that's a big regret I've got. I was so angry at the world and so bitter about it. I don't think I maximised enough from it. I was just so pissed off with it and so lonely and fed up. And that's what I think's really... And by the way, I've not got an answer here for anyone. But I don't know what the answer is to loneliness. But I just wanted to kind of speak about it and just talk about my episodes of loneliness, because from my social media, probably people think I've got an amazing life, but I've definitely felt it, COVID being one. But I don't know what the answer is to kind of get rid of that loneliness or to solve these problems.
I think we discussed talking about this before we actually did the topic, and we said, well, what's the answer? And I think the reality of it is there can't be, we're not doing a podcast here because we've got the answer for parent guilt, the answer of visualization, the answer for, we're on here because just like everybody else, we haven't got the answers. But I think the starting point is to talk about it. I think even listening to what you've just said there, it made me think a little bit like, I was thinking, actually, I mentioned the word, it's absolute nonsense really for me to say there's nobody to turn to. There's probably an element, a barrier of me putting barriers up there of like ego and, what would it mean for my business, or what would it mean for this? And I think the reality of it is you have to take those, the just as you were speaking, I thought you've got to take those barriers down. You've got to join a running club when you want to run. Talked about that before. You've got to, if you're lonely in COVID, you've got to look at the people, drop your guard, and reach out.
It's hard.
That's the only thing. I get it. I get it. But that's the only thing I would say.
And I've noticed with the podcast, you know, we've got a Patreon page where, you know, people can fire in questions and like, you kind of see that, you know, get involved in a community, whether it's a podcast community or whether it's a local quiz night or whether it's. I know it's so hard to make those first steps, but it's about getting that human interaction going again. Do you know what I mean? And joining a club or just meeting new people, and it is hard, but it can help a lot.
While we're on the subject, just before we go, Mike Bates is a friend of ours. I think he's on he's on your podcast anyway.
He's coming up in the next couple of weeks.
He's just done the Atlantic Ocean row on his own, and he did it in about 49 days or something from the day he left. Gran Canaria, it was the Canary Islands, I think.
It's around there, yeah.
And he gets to he got to Antigua, and he didn't see one person in 49 days. By the way, there was 120-foot waves. It was pitch black. The boats, God knows how he's done that right. But I said, what was the biggest issue? And he said, I'm never going to go that long again, 49 days without any human interaction. By a long way, that was the hardest part.
He said he saw people for the first 12 hours.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
I think that'd kill me, you know.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting what you said before about you're okay being on your own. My dad is okay being on his own, you know. He goes and stands there and has a pint on his own. To the point, right, we've been on a family night out, right? We've had a meal, a few drinks and stuff, and we've all had a few beers, and we're like, right, let's go home. And my dad will go, just drop us at the pub at the bottom of the road. I just want one on my own.
I'm like that. No,
I just want half an hour. And we're like, come on, we're all going back.
No.
We'll have a... No, come on,
Yeah.
And he loves that kind of just bit of loneliness. And
I'll do the same.
To me, I'm like, no, everyone stay together. Come on, everyone. So...
But I think the point to that is, though, and you've just touched on it, whether or not your dad does that or not, he's lonely. Whether or not I'm lonely I'm okay 95% of the time, the part that I'm lonely. And I think the key to it is to recognise that everybody shares it. It's the same things before. There might not be an answer to it. There's no objective to this podcast to find an answer. But the reality of it is one thing's certain, everybody shares it.
Yeah. 100%. And listen, and we live in a world where mental health is spoken about so much, and it's people opening up and talking. And the whole reason we said this is having those kind of talks as mates over a beer. Because I do think social media, again, you know, if you look at social media, no one's lonely. Everyone's got loads of mates.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's weird people saying, actually, you know what, I fucking feel pretty lonely. And I might not feel lonely all the time, but when I do, it feels fucking horrendous.
Yeah.
And there might be people there saying, well, I just feel lonely every day. And it's like, just acknowledging that.
Yeah.
You know, people do feel low at times.
Yeah.
But hopefully there are avenues that people can kind of venture down. And it's a shame that we've not got the answer for it. And if we did, I wouldn't have been lonely all the times I've been lonely, to be fair.
Yeah.
But again, at least we're talking about it.
Yeah.
And I would encourage people as well, if you are lonely, to reach out. Again, people do message me anyway about things that we discussed on the podcast. And again, if loneliness is a thing that's affected you, message me, because I'd love to know and learn a little bit more about it.
There's been bereavements in the family, by the way, as we discussed before, and there's kids involved. Coming back to your case, there are charities out there, and there's one, you know, Once Upon a Smile is one that we're involved in. It's about getting in touch with groups.
And that's been the theme there, what we've spoken about. And again, we both, interestingly enough, had different experiences of loneliness, but I think what the thing with the bereavement kind of story and maybe what you've maybe lacked in the sense of who'd you turn to, the one common denominator is people, like being able to open up. And what I will say before we end this show is I remember during COVID, you know, you were a great friend to me. I remember sitting in exchange flights.
Yeah, I remember that.
You know, and it's things like that weirdly that I remember from COVID. Do you know that, you know, you talk about having 5 friends you can turn to. Having one of those friends where you can go, I think we must have sat on that bench for about 2 hours just talking about life, which was a rarity in those weird, strange times. So I think trying to get people in your life that you can rely on, and that all starts from human interaction.
And I think the flip side is, you might not be the lonely one, so be one of those 5 friends. So it's not just the way that I need 5 friends. It could be somebody listening here. It's like, but hold on, are you one of the 5? And think that's equally as
Are
important.
you the one who does that text to the guy you haven't spoken to in a few weeks? How are you doing?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm making the effort. Do you want to grab a coffee? You know, or ringing random people as well. We spend so much time on social media texting and in WhatsApp groups. And I've got a particular friend who he didn't want to be a part of WhatsApp groups because his phone was going off every 2 minutes. So he left the main WhatsApp group. And it's so funny, you know, you post things into the WhatsApp group, assuming everyone's going to like see it. And then I sometimes forget he's not in it no more. So it's like, I've not spoken to him.
Yeah.
So now and again, I'll ring him once a week or once every other week. And how's it going? Funny enough, that Liverpool have just been told that because of the Champions League, the fiasco with UEFA, we get our refund for the tickets. And I put in the group of all the lads who go to the match, looks like we're getting our money back. And I thought, fucking hell, he's not in the group anymore. So I texted him and then I spoke to him on the phone for half an hour. It's little things like that. I'm just, you know, picking up the phone, ringing your mate you've not spoken to for whatever reason it might be. And I think human interaction is a big one, and it can help to kind of take away that loneliness.
Yeah. I think we should end it on asking again. We did this topic specifically because there was plenty of people reaching out for it. So if you've got any more topics that you want us to talk about, it don't mean we've got all the answers, but I don't think that's what this is about. No. We haven't got the answers to be a great parent. We haven't got the answers to cure loneliness or anything else. But I think the main position, the main starting position at least, is to open up about it and talk about it. So send them in. Yeah.
And for me, just on a dead personal note, I just enjoy being able to vent a little bit as well and actually be a bit vulnerable and say, you know what, look, I've felt fucking really lonely and shit at times, and it's nice to be, you know, it feels reassuring to know that, you know, there's someone there to listen as well. So yeah, don't be afraid to open up. Like Paul says, get in touch. Hope you enjoyed the show as always. Get in touch with your feedback, and we'll see you next week.